right, welcome back, Red Eyes members. We are talking to James Follett about his film Church of Global Warming. Again, his website is climatereview.net, and we're going to continue carrying on here, discussing some of the things that James bring up in his film. I want to touch upon some of these areas, as well as talking about ClimateGate, an issue that James unfortunately did not cover in the film because of the fact that ClimateGate were happening just around the time when James were finishing up the project. But there's a few things here, James, that I'd like to talk about, mainly surface temperature stations. This is one thing that was actually new to me. I know that this is a big part of what you were looking into as well. When you detail some of this in your film, did you primarily look at U.S. surface temperature stations, or was this from around the world? Refresh my memory regarding that.
Well, in the movie, I concentrated on the U.S. because one of the big boys in the blog world, Anthony Watts, has a huge project, surfacestations.org, to document the quality of surface stations. And why is this important? Well, it's important because the HAD-CRUT and the JIS-TEMP, which are the two major global temperature data sets, are based on surface stations. So he wanted to see whether they're viable or not. There's the urban heat island effect they're worried about. But whether I used America because that's where the project is. But the principle applies. And I mean, I can't say I covered all bases, but I do try to cover as many bases as I can think of. And so when I used America as an example, I can say, well, it's the same for the world. If you can look at on YouTube, there's it looks rather old, but there is a little demonstration that shows over the last 100 years the number of service stations across the world, and it declines rapidly from the beginning of the century. So all over the place, including places like Russia and China as well. So the whole world's data set is reducing, not only in numbers, but if you look and believe what surfacestations.org is saying, in quality, in quite a pronounced way.
Absolutely, and there's just the level of how should we put it then, the inefficiency when it comes to placing these stations as well is pretty interesting when you look around some of the images around the internet, which shows some of these surface temperature stations being placed next to air conditioning units and various parking lots where cars are parked and stuff, things like this. Tell us a little bit more about that, James.
Well, I think probably it's the turn of the century when, after the world industrialized and men's science level was rising, they really saw the value to understanding temperature. Temperature became such an important thing, and with aviation as well, it's humongously important. So early on in the century, people realized temperature is important, so they set up weather stations. And to try to be consistent, you don't want to move your weather stations year by year, because every place you put it has a microclimate. So, if you put it on the top of the hill, it's going to be perhaps cooler than if it was down in a little valley, which can warm up a bowl of heat. So they don't want to move them. But the problem is, and they generally put it around the cities, because even then they realize there's an urban heat island effect, even though the IPCC to this day refute it, which is amazing, even though it's well-documented science. So they generally try not to move them, which is fair enough. The principle is correct. However, the cities have expanded and gone through the areas which were often, or could have been, rural or, semi-rural, are now urban. So that will, of course, pollute the continuous data set. And so that's a large problem with, maybe 80-90% of the stations in America have this problem.
Yeah.
So this is so what I tried to do in my movie was I based the initial science over most of my slides, most of my presentations. I was trying to actually use IPCC acceptable data.
Yes.
But just draw different conclusions. I was trying to actually minimize the controversy. I've looked into the controversy, but I have to say, because I'm not a professor in the field, I can't explain every single nuance. I admit that. I can't do that, but I try to look at it as much as I can. So I tried to actually use unbiased data. It's only on this, perhaps at the end of my scientific exploration, then I go into the politics and economics. At the end of the scientific exploration, I say, well, even the data I'm using I've actually been kind of, I've been kind. I've been generous. We actually, if you look at the data I'm using, it's even that's been fudged. And that's where you come onto your whole climate gate, because the urban heat island effect is a obvious fudge, which is, I would say, almost irrefutable. Then there's even more dark fudges which come into perhaps play with the climate gate. Yeah,
absolutely. There's a few other kind of main areas as well that you did look into. For instance, tree rings, another one of these things that we hear a lot about, evidence for global warming. But tell us a little bit about the nature of what kind of trees they choose to drill into and so forth. There's a huge controversy there as well, isn't it, James?
Absolutely. I have looked at Michael Mann's original paper, and in his paper he mentions more than just tree rings. He mentions sediments and other sources, other proxies, other sort of methods to elucidate historical temperature. I don't know how much depth I should go into for the audience, but he has many different data sets that he says he used. But according to people like Steve McIntyre, at the end of the day, he may have cited them, but really what he used was bristlecone pines. And he took it from pretty much one site and relatively few trees. And some would argue maybe only just a single tree is actually the basis of his temperature reconstruction. So the data set is not exactly the most impressive. And the actual data itself is 100% questionable. The reason being is, a high school biologist will know that, growth is not necessarily to do with temperature. Growth is to do with many limiting factors, many things, nutrients in the soil, temperature is one, but really rainfall is the most important thing.
Yeah. And
bristlecone pines can survive in desert conditions, and they can go into hibernation for hundreds of years, hence they live for, 1,000 years or more. But they can survive very harsh conditions, and they can go into hibernation. And the harsh conditions may not be a temperature change necessarily. It'd be a lack of water.
Yes.
So he has correlated tree ring width. He's done his dendrochronology with tree ring width. And he said, well, this is to do with temperature. And we go, well, that's not really the proxy. The proxy is to water availability. So it is a bit spurious. And this was the foundation. Was it in IPCC 3? I think it was. It was the foundation of that report, and which was the thing they were heralding, and they cited something like 5 times throughout, the 1,000-page report. This is the crux of the matter. Look at this. This is the temperature of the last 1,000 years, and when you look at what it's based on, you got to worry a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. And this kind of leads us a little bit into the area of the influence of the sun as well. This is a major, obviously, key point in the whole discussion here, that we have changes taking place on the sun, and our knowledge about the sun is also very recent. We not too many years ago have started to put up satellites that directly monitoring the sun. We have SOHO satellites and so forth. They're monitoring solar flares, corona mass ejections, and things like this. What can you say in terms of the sun, and how does the IPCC incorporate this into their models, if at all, James?
Well, the climate models, I would love to give you a definitive answer, but no one knows except for the team, as they call it, the core people that belong to the whole ideology, based quite largely around the Climate Research Unit, the CRU in East Anglia. What goes in the models is non-transparent. I mean, they haven't released their code. They won't. They said when they were questioned in the Freedom of Information Act, I think it was McIntyre again. He's getting a good showing this evening. I think it was him who was asked for their data sets. It was McIntyre and McKendrick together. They asked for the original data, and they go, "Oh, we destroyed the original temperature data." It's like, well, that's good. All we have is our adjusted